When Rosa, a resilient mother, has been deceived for 2 years, what will she do to reclaim justice? Can the truth save a family, or will it leave behind wounds that can never heal? Can Rosa face the brutal betrayal of her own son? And when the truth is revealed, can justice restore the relationships that have been torn apart? Let's dive into the details of the story. Rosa Williams sat alone in the living room of her small house on the outskirts. The house had witnessed countless seasons of rain and sun, every corner marked by the passage of time like an old painting gradually fading. The yellow light from a small desk lamp illuminated her face, highlighting the deep wrinkles on her dark skin. These wrinkles weren't just signs of age, they were marks of a life full of hardships and challenges. Rosa had gone through difficult times, from losing loved ones to fighting against adversity, but she remained resilient, standing strong as a mother. She was preparing dinner for herself as she had done for many years. A simple dinner, just a plate of vegetables, a bit of meat, and a bowl of soup she had cooked earlier in the day. Although this meal was small, it always gave her a sense of peace, like a part of the simple life she had accepted. The sizzling sounds from the pot, the warmth from the stove, everything formed a familiar scene. However, today, the atmosphere in this room was no longer as peaceful as usual. The front door opened and a figure appeared. Rosa didn't need to look clearly to know who was walking in. It was Caleb, her only son. A tall, strong man with fair skin and determined eyes. But not today. Today, Caleb's eyes were different. He entered with a bouquet of fresh flowers, but his gaze was cold and distant, as though he had come from another world. Rosa felt the change immediately, but she didn't say anything, only smiled gently and invited him to sit down. Caleb placed the flowers on the table and sat down in the chair opposite her, his gaze still fixed on her face. He remained silent for a few seconds, looking at her as if searching for an answer. Suddenly, he spoke, his voice void of emotion, cold enough to send a chill down her spine. "Mom, your daughter-in-law still sends you $7,000 every month, right?" This question hit Rosa like a slap in the face. She froze, her heart racing. This was a question she never thought she would hear from her son. Over the past 2 years, she hadn't received a penny from Caleb or his wife, Sophia. Those months had passed in hardship, with meals from the church and food packages from neighbors. She never wanted to burden her son and didn't want him to feel like he had to support her. She just quietly accepted the life she had, taking care of everything herself. But now, Caleb's questions shattered everything. Rosa sat there unsure how to react. It felt like the whole world had suddenly turned its back on her. All the questions, all the doubts about the past months flooded her mind. She didn't understand why her son would ask that, why he thought she was getting money every month. She tried to regain her composure, but her heart was pounding like a bell ringing through the empty room. Her lips trembled, but she forced a smile and responded to the question. Her mind spun, unable to believe what she had just heard. That question felt like an old wound being reopened, a wound she hadn't even known existed all this time. "Mom, I haven't received anything from your wife," Rosa said quietly, her voice joking, unable to continue. She didn't know how to explain or what to do with the emotions welling up inside her. Meanwhile, Caleb sat silently, showing no response, but his eyes were filled with suspicion, as if he were trying to find a reason for this silence. After a long pause, Rosa looked at her son. Tears silently fell as she realized one thing. Caleb was no longer the child she had raised, nurtured, and loved all these years. He had changed, not just in the way he looked at her, but in the way he treated her. The feeling of loneliness and abandonment flooded her heart. She had sensed this distance for a while, but she never imagined it would come in such a cruel way. Rosa turned her face away, not wanting Caleb to see the tears. She didn't want him to see her weakness. She didn't even want to ask him why he allowed his wife to do this, why she had to endure months of poverty without anyone knowing. But Caleb's question had pushed her to the brink of the truth. A truth she didn't want to face but couldn't avoid. With trembling hands, Rosa stood up and walked over to the table where the bouquet still lay. The light from the lamp shone on the bright petals, creating a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere in the room. She couldn't bear the silence any longer. Rosa felt like someone left behind in the darkness while her son lived in the light of wealth. Confusion and uncertainty rose in her heart. Rosa didn't know what to do. She just knew that Caleb's question had opened a door she had been trying to close for so long. That door had opened, revealing all the truths she never wanted to know. Caleb's question was not just a careless inquiry. It was a sign that everything had changed, and those changes would never return to how they were before. She sighed, looking through the window at the shimmering lights outside. The feeling of loss and loneliness overwhelmed her heart, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't let this deception continue. And whether Caleb understood or not, she would do whatever it took to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Rosa, you don't have to suffer alone," she whispered to herself, telling herself to be strong enough to face the truth no matter what. Rosa stood there in the small living room, the warm yellow light from the desk lamp highlighting the deep wrinkles on her face. The marks of time and silent sorrow seemed to have settled in every corner of the house. She wasn't young anymore, but her heart still beat strongly, still full of emotions and worries. Today, the truth she had always tried to avoid suddenly returned, slapping her in the face like a cold, harsh reality. She couldn't take her eyes off her son Caleb. He had once been the child she raised, taught, and loved since he was little. But now, standing before her was a strange man, cold and distant. Although Caleb had placed the fresh flowers on the table, his eyes didn't resemble those of the past. No warmth, no closeness, only unfamiliarity and distance. She looked into her son's eyes, but she couldn't find any empathy or love in them. Only distance, like an invisible wall had been built between them. Rosa felt a pain that words couldn't express, but she remained silent, her heart full of emotions. She didn't know what to do next, only that everything was changing and no one could stop it. "You say your wife sends money to me, but all I've received are gifts from the church," Rosa spoke, her voice low, tinged with doubt and a bit of anger. The words came out like a cold gust of wind, making the tension in the room even thicker. She hadn't wanted to say this, but looking into Caleb's eyes, she couldn't stay silent any longer. The past months had been difficult, but she had never once asked anyone for help. And now, with the lies exposed, she couldn't remain silent anymore. Caleb didn't respond right away. He just remained silent, his gaze shifting between his mother and the floor. That silence felt like a cover-up, as if he was searching for an explanation but couldn't find one. Rosa stared at him, the feeling in her heart growing stronger. Something is wrong, she thought. There are things that haven't been said. She couldn't sit still, couldn't just let the lies continue to cover her life. Every word, every action from Caleb made her feel like she was left behind. Why did he do this? Why did his wife continue to deceive her for 2 years without any remorse? Rosa was no longer a woman easily deceived. She knew she had been lied to, but she still didn't know how to face this truth. The confusion and doubt began to rise within Rosa. Everything kept circling in her mind, making her unable to think of anything else but the question, why? She recalled the time she had met Sophia, her daughter-in-law. Every time she came, always smiling, bringing expensive gifts and sweet words. But now looking back, everything seemed fake. Rosa had clearly seen the coldness in Sophia's eyes whenever they met, but she never imagined her daughter-in-law could go this far. Were the gifts Sophia sent just to cover up the truth? Were their brief meetings only acts she staged to deceive Rosa? I trusted them too much, Rosa told herself, the truth feeling like a knife cutting into her heart. She wanted to call out Caleb's name to ask him why he did this, but she knew that no answer could ease the pain. She looked at Caleb once more, this time not with the gaze of a mother, but with the eyes of a woman who was exhausted by the lies. "Can't you see it?" Rosa wondered, though she didn't dare speak. She was afraid that if she said it, everything would fall apart. But the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. Rosa felt like she was standing on the edge, and with one more step, everything would be revealed. The questions kept repeating in her mind. How can I trust them again? How can I continue living with this lie? The questions weren't just for Caleb or Sophia, but for herself. She had accepted the truth, but now she realized that it was more painful than she had ever imagined. A moment of silence stretched out, only the sound of Rosa's sigh and the ticking of the clock on the wall. She felt like time had stopped, as if it were waiting for her to make a decision. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't continue living in this lie. She had to face it. No matter how painful it was, she wouldn't back down. "Rosa, what will you do next?" she wondered, the question not just for herself, but for the future. Perhaps it was time for her to speak up. This story wouldn't end here. It would bring more truths to light and decisions Rosa would have to make. Rosa walked over to the table where Caleb's bouquet still lay. The light from the desk lamp shimmered on the petals, but in her heart, those petals no longer seemed as beautiful. The truths were slowly revealing, and she had to prepare for the confrontation ahead. She knew that her life would never be the same again. But one thing was certain, Rosa wouldn't let this deception continue. She was ready to face it all, to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Rosa's house was strangely quiet, with only the ticking of the clock on the wall echoing like the beating of a heart, fearing that something was about to happen. The heavy atmosphere grew thicker when the door opened again. Sophia entered just as she always did, with a sweet smile and the flawless appearance of a successful woman. She brought with her an expensive gift, the scent of high-end perfume filling the air, making the room feel even heavier than before. Sophia Rosa's daughter-in-law had bright eyes and a smile that never left her face, as if everything in her life were perfect. But Rosa could never forget the cold look Sophia gave her whenever they faced each other. Rosa could sense the artificiality in every gesture Sophia made. This wasn't the first time she had seen her act like this, and it wouldn't be long before more sweet words came, yet they were completely insincere. "Mom, did you forget again? I still bring you money every month. Don't you remember?" Sophia said, her tone sweet, but laced with a cunning that Rosa could easily detect. Those words hit Rosa like a cold stone thrown in her face, causing her heart to stop beating for a moment. Sophia was still talking about the money that Rosa had never received. Though the words seemed gentle, they contained a shamelessness that Rosa could not accept. Rosa looked at Sophia, her eyes sharp like blades cutting through the lies she was trying to conceal. The feeling of being deceived and disrespected swelled inside her. But instead of letting her emotions take control, Rosa remained calm, not rushing to respond. She knew that if she lost her composure, the conversation would turn into an uncontrollable storm. "If you've brought the money, it must have gotten lost somewhere," Rosa replied, her voice gentle but deeply suspicious. Her response was not only a subtle defiance, but also a statement that she was not easily deceived. Rosa didn't want to escalate the situation, but the suffocating feeling inside her made each word sharper than ever. Sophia stood there, her smile unchanged, but her eyes began to show signs of discomfort. Rosa could see the unease flickering in her daughter-in-law's eyes. Everything Sophia had prepared beforehand, gifts, lies, seemed to lose their effectiveness in the face of Rosa's sharp awareness. The anxiety slowly became evident on Sophia's face. She stepped closer to Rosa, presenting the expensive gift, but Rosa didn't take it. She knew too well that the gift held no value other than to conceal the truth. Rosa couldn't help but notice the change in Sophia's demeanor. Her smile seemed forced, her eyes furtively scanning the room as if searching for a way to escape Rosa's scrutiny. Gone was the self-assuredness. Gone was the glamorous appearance of a powerful woman. Rosa recognized this and couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Her daughter-in-law could no longer deceive her. Rosa remained silent, not rushing to speak, merely observing. A hidden wave of anger rose within her, a smoldering resentment that she couldn't conceal any longer. Everything was being brought into the light, but she still needed patience to listen more. The truth could not be hidden forever. Rosa stood there, her gaze still sharp, making Sophia increasingly uncomfortable. The unease of her daughter-in-law grew stronger, impossible to conceal. She tried to say something else, but Rosa no longer cared for the lies. She felt that this deception would not last much longer. "You can say whatever you like, but I already know what's going on," Rosa said gently, her voice cold. "And if you think I will let you continue deceiving me, you are mistaken." Her words weren't loud, but they were enough to make the tension in the room palpable. Sophia stood there, unsure of how to respond. She simply stood still, still holding the gift Rosa had yet to open. Rosa's gaze locked onto her daughter-in-law's without a hint of doubt, only certainty. At that moment, Rosa felt as though she was facing an undeniable truth, but still needed more time to fully uncover everything. Rosa didn't say anything more, but her look was powerful enough to make Sophia feel trapped with no way out. Sophia could no longer deceive her. For the past months, Rosa had lived in the shadow of lies, but today, the light of truth had begun to shine into those dark corners. Rosa felt the strength of her clarity. She would no longer be the one deceived, no longer someone who could be manipulated by her daughter-in-law's sweet words. Sophia remained silent, unable to say anything else. She stood there, her fingers tightening around the gift, trying to maintain a calm facade. But Rosa knew all too well. She no longer had the confidence she once had. Anxiety had completely overtaken Sophia. Rosa turned away, not looking back. She didn't need to prove anything further. The truth had started to emerge, and that was the most important thing. As for Sophia, whether she tried to conceal it or pretended to be unaware, she could no longer continue living in that fake world. Everything would be exposed, and Rosa would be the one to bring the truth to light. Nothing could stop her. In her heart, Rosa had already made a decision. This daughter-in-law could no longer deceive her, or this family any longer. Rosa stood silently outside the bank, her breath heavy, her hands gripping her purse tightly. The tension weighed on each step she took. She never imagined that she would find herself here, that her growing doubts would lead her to such an important decision. But now, she could no longer live in the shadows of deceit. Everything had become too clear, and she needed to uncover the truth. With each step into the bank, it felt as though she was moving farther away from the safe world of the past, where she could only dream of peaceful days and simple things. Rosa inhaled deeply and stepped through the door, feeling the cold atmosphere inside, not just from the air conditioning, but from the impersonal gaze of the bank employees. She walked straight to the counter, where a young employee sat typing away on the computer. The woman greeted her with a polite smile, but Rosa couldn't shake the feeling that there was something empty in that smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you today?" the bank employee asked with a calm tone. Rosa faced her, struggling to maintain her composure. "My son says he's been sending me $7,000 every month for the past 2 years. Please check the records for me," she said, her sharp eyes fixed on the employee as if testing the accuracy of the data. The bank employee nodded without question and quickly began typing on the keyboard. Rosa stood still, her anxiety mounting with each passing second. Each keystroke felt like the tick of a clock, a rhythm echoing the beat of her heart. The months of uncertainty and worry had led to this moment, and now she would finally know the truth. It could not be hidden anymore. As the bank employee stopped typing, she looked up, her expression still neutral, but a slight hesitation appeared in her eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there have been no transactions into your account during this time," she said, her voice gentle, but those words hit Rosa like a cold slap to the face. The truth struck her with the force of a punch, shattering any hope she had held onto for the past 2 years. Rosa stood frozen, unable to believe what she had just heard. The world around her seemed to stop moving. All she could hear was the reverberation of the employee's words. She could not comprehend. It could not fathom that her own son, the one she had loved and trusted all these years, could have done something like this. "It can't be," she thought silently. "But this is the truth I can't deny." Anger and helplessness surged within Rosa like a fire, threatening to consume her thoughts. 2 years of living in poverty, 2 years of being deceived, and now when the truth finally came to light, she didn't know what to do. This betrayal was too much, too painful. A mother could never imagine her son doing something like this. But along with the pain, there was another, stronger feeling: determination. Rosa had not risen through the years of hardship just to be deceived again. She had endured enough. "I can't let it end like this," she thought to herself, her eyes flashing with resolve. "I have to expose the truth." She looked at the bank employee, her gaze now not one of doubt, but one of unwavering certainty. "Please check again," Rosa said, her voice calm but firm. "I need to know for sure that no transactions have been overlooked." The bank employee hesitated slightly before resuming her typing. The silence between them grew heavier, as though the world outside had completely stopped. Each second seemed to stretch out endlessly. Finally, after a few moments, the employee stopped and looked back up at Rosa, shaking her head. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but there have been no transactions in your account from 2 years ago until now," the employee said again, her tone beginning to carry a note of sympathy. But her words were like a knife to Rosa's heart, a truth that could no longer be avoided. Rosa turned away, unable to stand still any longer. The feeling of everything collapsing around her left her drained, but she couldn't let it consume her. She could no longer be weak, not in this moment. "Now I know," she whispered to herself, her anger building up. "They've been lying to me, and I won't let this continue." With tears threatening to fall, Rosa walked out of the bank. Each step felt like it carried her farther from the world she had known and closer to the truth. Her heart was filled with a fierce sense of determination, a promise to herself that she would not let this betrayal stand. She would confront Caleb and Sophia, and she would fight to reclaim the respect she deserved. Rosa was no longer just a mother deceived. She was a woman of strength, no longer willing to be fooled. "They thought I was weak," Rosa thought, but they were wrong. This story was not just about money or betrayal. It was about a woman standing up for herself, fighting for the truth in a world built on lies. She knew the battle was just beginning, and this time she would not lose. Rosa walked into her small house, her mind torn apart by the truth she had just uncovered. Every step she took in this house felt like a journey into the past, to the days when she had lived in the darkness of deception unaware. The walls still held the marks of warm evenings, of the time she had cared for Caleb and Sophia, but now everything had changed. All the familiar feelings, the sense of peace seemed to have vanished. She felt the loneliness rise within her, but she wouldn't allow herself to back down. Rosa knew that no matter how painful the truth was, she had to face it, and she wouldn't stop until everything was exposed. She found the familiar armchair, the one she had sat in 1,000 times, weaving dreams of a happy family, and slowly sat down, taking a long, deep breath. She opened the small drawer beside the table where her old notebook was still carefully kept as an essential part of her life. Each page of this notebook told a story, a note about the events of her daily life. She remembered the days when she was a young woman, when she kept these notes to record every detail in her family's life. Now, with the dark truths revealing themselves, this notebook had become a crucial tool to uncover the secrets she had been unaware of. Rosa picked up the notebook, her eyes following each line of writing. The visits from Sophia, the brief but calculating conversation she had with her, everything was recorded meticulously. May 10th, Sophia came bringing cakes and a gift. She said the money had been sent, but there was no proof. She said I should remember, but I never received anything. Rosa read silently, each word striking her heart like an arrow. These notes, these details that she had once thought insignificant, now became important clues. The feeling of betrayal in her heart became clearer. Each time Sophia came, every lie she told, now all of it had become small steps of deceit recorded in this notebook like an indictment. Each page was a stepping stone guiding her toward the truth. Rosa flipped through a few more pages, each one recording events she hadn't paid attention to before. The expensive gifts, the sweet words from Sophia, all seemed like a play that she had staged. Rosa felt her anger begin to rise, but she still tried to remain calm. She couldn't let her emotions control her at this moment. If she wanted to find the truth, she had to stay clear-headed, see everything from a different perspective. How can I trust her again? Rosa asked herself, her lips pressed together. And Caleb, my son, how could he let this happen? The tension inside her grew stronger. Rosa looked at the notebook, but it wasn't just the notes she was looking at. It was the clarity in her actions. She was no longer just a helpless mother deceived by her children. She was a strong woman, and she had decided she would not let this deception continue. She took another blank sheet of paper, picked up a pen, and began writing notes about Sophia's visits, about the lies she had told. Each line she wrote was a step further on the path to finding the truth. Every small detail, every sign she hadn't noticed before, was now engraved in her memory. She wasn't just recording past events, but also the feelings she had during those moments, the ones she had overlooked, the truth she had failed to see. July 15th, Sophia came to visit. She brought expensive gifts, but no cash. She said that her husband, Caleb, had transferred money to me, but I never received anything. Rosa read again from the notebook. The feeling of disappointment rose within her. Those months she had lived in waiting, but now she realized it had all been a game of deception. The expensive gifts and sweet words were just a facade to hide the cruel truth behind them. Rosa paused and sighed. She knew she couldn't continue living in this lie. The feeling of betrayal, of abandonment, became clearer and clearer. But she also knew that there was only one way to solve this situation: expose the whole truth and never let anyone deceive her again. Neither Caleb nor Sophia will escape, Rosa told herself, her eyes filled with determination. She was strong enough to stand up and not be crushed by lies anymore. She had enough evidence, enough truth to confront them and demand answers. Rosa knew that this battle wouldn't be easy. She would have to face Caleb and Sophia's anger and their justifications, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had lived a life full of pain and trials, and she wouldn't let anyone, even her own son, make her weak again. She carefully put the notebook back in the drawer and stood up. The strength inside her was like a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Rosa knew that things would never be the same again, but she had mentally prepared for the upcoming confrontation. She would not just reclaim what she had lost, but she would also demand the respect and rights of a mother, a woman who would never be deceived again. As she stepped out of the room, Rosa felt that she was no longer a weak old woman. She was a mother standing up to protect her dignity, to defend what she had sacrificed. Her journey to uncover the truth had only just begun, and she would not stop until the light of truth shone through every corner of her life. Rosa stood in her kitchen, carefully placing the dishes on the table, each plate of roasted meat, sliced vegetables perfectly arranged. The meal was prepared with care, just like any other time Caleb came home. The smell of dinner filled the house, but tonight there was no warmth of family comfort. Everything felt cold, not from the air outside, but from the tension, the weight of what was about to unfold. The dining room was perfectly set, the lights dimmed gently, the familiar paintings hanging on the walls, and the chair where Rosa often sat during family chats. But now the room had become a trap. It was neat, yes, but it was filled with the anticipation of a confrontation that Rosa knew was unavoidable. Waiting seemed to stretch on forever. Rosa heard the familiar sound of Caleb and Sophia's car pulling into the driveway. The door creaked open, and Caleb's familiar footsteps echoed in the hallway. And then Sophia, dressed in expensive clothes, entered right behind him with a smile that barely concealed the unease in her eyes. They both looked at Rosa, and, as always, Caleb spoke first, his voice tentative, almost too casual. "Mom, what's for dinner tonight?" Caleb asked, his tone light, but Rosa could sense the hesitation in his words, the distance between them. Rosa didn't answer immediately, just silently moved to the table, placing the food down slowly. She looked at the small envelope in her hands, the envelope that contained the truth. These papers, evidence of the lies she had been living under for 2 years, were about to be exposed. Everything was ready. Now was the time to reveal it. She didn't rush. Rosa remained calm, her eyes focused on Caleb. The silence hung heavily between them, each passing second bringing them closer to the moment that would change everything. Finally, she placed the envelope on the table and slowly opened it, revealing the documents inside. "Do you remember transferring $7,000 every month?" Rosa said, her voice steady, unwavering. "I checked, and I haven't seen a single penny deposited into my account." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. She didn't speak in anger. There was no need for that. The truth alone was enough. Caleb stared at the envelope, looking confused at first, as if he couldn't understand what was happening. But as Rosa began to pull out the papers, spreading them out on the table, he started to see the truth unfold before him. Each document was a piece of the puzzle. The bank statements, the records, all neatly organized, telling the same story, one that Caleb couldn't deny any longer. He began to fidget, his eyes scanning the papers in disbelief. With each glance, the truth was becoming clearer. His face slowly transformed from confusion to panic, the color draining from it. The silence in the room was deafening. The tension was so thick it felt suffocating. Rosa remained calm, her eyes locked on Caleb. The documents were there, irrefutable. There was no way out now. Caleb couldn't speak at first. His mouth opened, but the words wouldn't come. His gaze shifted from the papers back to his mother, but it was clear he didn't know how to explain this. He had no excuse. The truth was there, staring him in the face. Mom, you can't, Caleb stammered, but there was no defending himself. Rosa's eyes narrowed, for disappointment palpable. There was nothing he could say to make it better. His words were hollow, and his usual confidence crumbled in the face of the overwhelming truth. Sophia stood next to him silent, her face ashen. She didn't speak, but Rosa could feel the unease radiating from her. Sophia's eyes darted nervously between the documents, and Rosa, realizing that the lies they had told were now unraveling before them. The carefully constructed story was falling apart, and there was no way to stop it. Rosa didn't rush to speak again. She let the weight of the moment settle. Caleb's face was pale, his eyes flickering between the documents and his mother's unwavering gaze. He had nothing left to say. Every attempt at explanation fell flat. You lied to me, Caleb, and now you're standing here trying to act like nothing happened. I didn't ask for this. I never wanted to be deceived. But I can't stay silent anymore, Rosa finally said, her voice sharp yet calm. I've spent 2 years living in a lie, and I'm done. There was no anger in her tone, just a quiet, undeniable truth. Caleb looked as though he was struggling to process what was happening. His breath came faster, his hands trembling as he looked at the papers. The realization of his betrayal began to sink in. He didn't know what to do with himself anymore. He had lied to his mother, a woman who had given him everything, and now he was staring at the consequences of those lies. Sophia, unable to hold it any longer, shifted uncomfortably beside Caleb. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, and even she could feel the weight of what was happening. The air seemed to freeze around them. Mom? Caleb said again, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I didn't think. But the words felt weak, like an excuse that could never cover up the truth. Rosa stood still, not moving an inch. She didn't need to hear more. She had waited 2 years for this moment, and now that it had come, she wouldn't allow herself to be swayed by more lies. She had raised Caleb, loved him, believed in him, and now she had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes even the people you love the most can betray you. As the silence grew, the reality of the situation dawned on Caleb. His mother wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let him brush this aside. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and disbelief. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered, but the words felt hollow. Rosa didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. She knew the truth, and that was enough. She had made up her mind. No apology could undo the pain he had caused. No excuse could erase the years of deception. But in that moment, as she stood across from her son, Rosa realized that this was her moment to take back control of her life. No longer would she be a victim. She was a woman who would stand up for herself no matter how much it hurt. Sophia's eyes flickered with unease, but she said nothing. She knew it was over. Caleb's look of disbelief faded into a slow, painful acceptance. And Rosa, standing tall in the face of it all, knew this battle was hers to win. The dinner, once a gesture of family warmth, now felt like a battlefield. The truth had been exposed, and there was no turning back. The room became eerily silent as Rosa continued to sift through the documents, each piece of paper a mirror reflecting the deceit she had endured for the past 2 years. Rosa showed no sign of haste. She moved carefully, step by step, making everything clear, exposing every lie of Caleb and Sophia in painstaking detail. The light from the lamps in the living room reflected off the table, illuminating the papers that Rosa never wanted to revisit, but she knew this was the moment she had to face the truth. Sophia stood nearby, lips tightly pressed together, eyes avoiding Rosa's gaze. She said nothing, but Rosa could feel the unease, the fear that enveloped her. She could no longer play her game, could no longer conceal her dark deeds. Rosa looked at Sophia, no longer with any trace of affection. She had caused Rosa pain, broken the trust Rosa had placed in her family. All that remained between them now was Rosa's anger and determination to seek justice. "I didn't just find lies from Caleb. She withdrew money from my account without informing me. Did you know about this?" Rosa looked at Caleb, her question no longer an inquiry, but an undeniable truth. "This is the evidence. Every number, every transaction carried out without my consent. What you thought was helping me was actually part of a scam." Rosa pointed to the papers spread out on the table, each one a piece of evidence, every number a painful confession. Caleb couldn't help but look at them, his eyes no longer filled with the confidence they once held. His eyes widened, his face pale, unable to speak. Regret flooded his mind, but there was nothing he could do to fix it now. Everything was too late. "Mom, I didn't know," stammered, his voice faltering, unable to justify his actions. He took a step back, as if trying to escape what was unfolding. But how could he run when the truth was so clear? Rosa continued to stare at him, her eyes sharp as knives, as if she wanted to tear apart the lies Caleb had so carefully built. The things she thought would never happen in her family were now shattered like a painting drawn wrong. She had spent her entire life raising him, trusting him, yet he chose to deceive her. The pain in her heart was indescribable, but she no longer had time to feel sorrow. She had to do what was right. She had to face this betrayal. Sophia stood silently next to Caleb, but in her eyes, Rosa saw something like a quiet regret, but it quickly vanished, replaced by suspicion and inescapable tension. She knew everything was over. She could no longer maintain the perfect facade she had built all this time. But she dared not speak, dared not contradict Rosa's accusations. The documents, the transaction copies, and the irrefutable evidence had said it all. Rosa spoke again, this time not to ask, but to force them to face the truth. "You can't keep deceiving me anymore. Everything I've endured wasn't because of me, but because of this betrayal," Rosa said, her voice firm without a hint of doubt. "She took money from my account, and you let her do it. I can't forgive this." She looked at Caleb once more, her gaze no longer filled with love, no longer the gentle mother he had always trusted. She had grown too tired, too hurt to remain silent. Every word she spoke was like a knife cutting into Caleb's heart, each word carrying a sadness he could no longer bear. Caleb began to tremble. He couldn't believe what was happening. He had once thought he could hide it all, that Sophia could protect him, that it would all pass without anyone finding out. But now he knew nothing could be hidden forever. Everything he did, every action was being exposed right before his eyes, and no excuse could change the truth. "Mom, I didn't know," Caleb repeated, but this time his words felt like a confession. He could no longer stand firm in front of his mother. Regret and confusion welled up in his eyes. He looked at her but couldn't find any answers. Sophia stood next to Caleb but dared not speak. She looked at the papers on the table, her eyes no longer confident like before. She knew everything was over. that she could no longer hide the truth. But instead of facing it, Sophia still tried to maintain her facade. She turned her face away, her eyes drifting past Rosa, but she didn't dare look directly at her. Rosa didn't need an explanation, didn't need their apologies. She had lost all trust in those she loved most, and this time she would not forgive them. She had stood up, taken control of her life, and would continue on her path, not allowing anyone to deceive her again. She was not only fighting for herself, but also for others, those who had been deceived and suffered in silence. She knew that no matter how much Caleb and Sophia tried to conceal it, the truth would eventually be revealed. And she would be the one to bring that light to them, ensuring that the lies would no longer persist. There's nothing more to say. Rosa finally spoke, her voice firm, no longer filled with any doubt. You've done what you've done, and you must take responsibility. And I will not let these lies affect me anymore. With a determined gaze, she walked out of the living room, leaving Caleb and Sophia standing there speechless. The tension in the air remained, but in Rosa's heart, her determination had triumphed. She was no longer afraid, no longer trembling at what had transpired. She would never let anyone deceive her again. The room was silent, as if time had stopped. The dim light reflected off the thin curtains, creating a lonely, empty atmosphere. Rosa and Caleb faced each other, the distance between them not just physical, but the shattered relationships that stood between them. Rosa stood there, calm, unwavering, her eyes sharp with determination. Meanwhile, Caleb stood frozen, his hands trembling, his face filled with confusion and regret. Rosa didn't need to say another word. She had already laid everything out with the documents and evidence she had dug up, but at that moment, she didn't need any more proof. The truth was clear enough. She just needed Caleb to understand, to grasp what he had done and how deeply it had hurt her. My son, I don't need money. I need respect and honesty. Do you know what you've done to me? Rosa asked, her voice soft yet firm, without a trace of threat, but without any weakness either. She was no longer Caleb's mother in that moment. She was no longer the woman he could manipulate easily. Caleb stood still, as if her words had sealed off his heart like a powerful wave crashing onto the shore, irreversible and overwhelming. He couldn't answer right away. A surge of disappointment, regret, and guilt washed over him like a tide that swept away everything in its path. Caleb looked into Rosa's eyes, but he couldn't find forgiveness there. He couldn't find the love he'd always sought in her gaze. Silence enveloped the room. Each passing second felt like a deeper wound to his soul. Every word Rosa spoke seemed like a knife cutting into his heart, but he had no defense, no excuse left. Everything had already happened, and now he had to face the consequences of his actions. Rosa didn't condemn him. She didn't need to shout or criticize him. She didn't want to break him even further. The truth and its cost would slowly sink in for Caleb, and he would have to face it alone. No one could fix this for him. No one could take responsibility for his mistakes. Every error, every betrayal would have to be repaired by him and him alone. Do you know how much you've hurt me, Caleb? Rosa continued, her eyes still locked on him. She wasn't angry, but each word was filled with sorrow. Sorrow for all the sacrifices, for all the trust she had placed in him, only to have it shattered. Caleb felt a lump in his throat. He couldn't speak, couldn't apologize enough to make up for what he had done. He stood there motionless, and that was all he could do. He couldn't look at his mother, couldn't face the disappointment in her eyes. Rosa didn't need Caleb to say anything because she knew he couldn't. She knew that words didn't matter anymore. Actions were what counted. And she knew no matter what, Caleb would have to learn how to rise from this mistake. If he didn't, he would live forever in lies and regret. She turned away, not wanting to see the weakness in her son, but inside she was filled with a deep sadness. She didn't hate him, she didn't want to destroy his life, but she couldn't just forgive him for the damage he had done. Sophia stood next to Caleb, completely silent. Rosa didn't need to look at her to know that Sophia was feeling uneasy, but Sophia didn't dare speak. She no longer had the power to justify herself or explain anything. Rosa's documents, the irrefutable evidence, had exposed everything. The lies of both her and Caleb had been revealed, and there was nothing left to change that truth. But Sophia remained there silent as a ghost, unwilling to speak another word. Rosa didn't need an apology from Sophia. She knew she wasn't capable of acknowledging her wrongs. But Rosa also knew that the truth would serve as a painful lesson for both Caleb and Sophia, a lesson they would never forget. Caleb remained still, but Rosa could see that he was beginning to comprehend the truth. He no longer held the confident air he once had. Every word Rosa spoke hit him like a direct blow to his heart. Panic had replaced all the excuses he had been so ready to make. He couldn't deny it anymore. The numbers, the documents, they had exposed everything. And now he had to face himself. You can't change anything anymore. You have to take responsibility for what you've done, Rosa said, her voice no longer the soft tone of a mother, but the resolute voice of a woman who had endured enough. She didn't need forgiveness from him. She only needed her son to realize his mistakes and learn how to stand up from them. Caleb didn't respond. He just stood there, his heart heavy with disappointment and regret. He felt like a failure, like a son unworthy of his mother's love. But all he could do now was stand there quietly, facing the truth that Rosa had laid bare. The silence stretched on. Rosa looked at Caleb one last time, then turned away. "You will have to learn how to live with this truth," she said softly, but with resolve. She didn't need to say any more. Everything was already crystal clear. Rosa left the living room, leaving Caleb alone with the chaotic thoughts racing through his mind. But she didn't look back. She had done everything she could to help him see his mistake, and now she had to let him face it on his own. Rosa stood in the living room, the moonlight streaming through the window, softening the lines on her face. Tonight, the space around her was still like a painting, filled with serenity, only the moonlight and her quiet emotions filling the air. The room was silent, with no outside noise, just the ticking of time passing and her steady breath. Rosa felt an indescribable lightness in her heart, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. She no longer felt the lingering pain of betrayal. While she couldn't forget what had happened, she knew she couldn't live forever in the past. Life had to go on, and she wouldn't allow the suffering and betrayal of her son to weaken her inner strength. It was a difficult decision, but it was something she had to do. Rosa sat quietly in her old armchair in the living room. She had spent her life taking care of her family, nurturing and loving Caleb, but now she had to face an unavoidable truth. The evidence of betrayal was clear. There was no arguing with it anymore. But she wouldn't let her emotions take control. She wouldn't let hatred consume her mind. She took up the old notebook, the one where she had recorded every event in her life. The difficult months, the times she overcame challenges, the sacrifices, and even the small joys. She opened the familiar page where she had written lines during her darkest days. She took the pen and wrote a sentence, the words appearing gently beneath her hand, full of truth and strength. The truth cannot be hidden forever. That sentence wasn't just a reminder of honesty, it was a declaration of the value of strength in life. Rosa knew she had done no wrong in loving Caleb and trusting him. Yes, he had betrayed her, but she couldn't let that pain dominate her life. Yes, that betrayal hurt, but in that pain, she found her liberation. Rosa looked at the documents she had laid out in front of Caleb. The numbers still appeared in her mind, but now she didn't feel pain, only calm. She had made the decision to forgive. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant continuing to live with dignity, knowing that no matter who hurt her, she could stand tall, she could continue to love. In these moments, Rosa felt a peace she had never known before. Forgiveness was not an act of weakness, but a strong choice. She no longer allowed anger or resentment to overpower her. She understood that forgiveness was the way to preserve the dignity and respect she deserved. She couldn't live forever in the past, and she couldn't let those wounds make her fall. For Rosa, forgiveness was how she would heal, how she would move forward, how she would find herself again. Though the betrayal of Caleb and Sophia could not be undone, Rosa decided not to let that pain define her life. She knew that there was still so much life to explore, so many opportunities to start anew, and she wouldn't allow her son's mistakes to cloud what truly mattered. You need to learn how to rise from your mistakes, Rosa told herself. And I need to learn how to live on even without you by my side, even facing this hurt. The moonlight outside the window continued to shine, soft but never weak. Rosa stood up and looked outside where the stars twinkled in the night sky. She felt a sense of calm in her heart, as if those stars were reminding her of hope, of the possibility to begin again. The past couldn't be changed, but the future could always be renewed. She wrote another line in her notebook, like a reminder for herself and anyone who needed a sign of strength in life. Learning to forgive is not about forgetting, but about keeping your dignity, about continuing to love yourself. Rosa placed the pen down, her heart lighter than ever. Forgiveness was an act of strength, not weakness. She knew she had overcome this pain and could now look forward with a peaceful heart. She didn't need to please anyone else but herself. She had done enough, and now it was time to live for herself. When the tears no longer represented pain but freedom, Rosa knew she had found liberation in her own heart. She would not let anyone, whether her son or daughter-in-law, take away what she truly deserved. And though this story hadn't ended, Rosa had found a way to write the next chapter with hope and unconditional love for herself. Rosa stood on the porch, the darkness of the night enveloping her. A gentle breeze brushed through, making the tree branches sway, emitting a soft sound like the whispers of nature. Everything around her was quiet, but within her there was an indescribable sense of peace. The bright moonlight shone down, highlighting her figure in the darkness, like a woman who had overcome every challenge in life, ready to move forward on the path ahead. It seemed as if everything had come to an end. She had faced betrayal bravely, uncovered the truth, and refused to let the pain control her. Rosa had chosen to forgive, not to forget, but to free herself to regain the respect and self-worth she deserved. But perhaps the most important thing was that she had taught Caleb a lesson about justice, truth, and forgiveness. The light from the outdoor lamp illuminated her face, making Rosa's eyes shine brighter than ever. She was no longer the weak mother, but a strong woman who had found peace within herself. It was as if everything she had gone through was just part of the long journey she needed to endure. Caleb, having stood silently in the living room, could no longer bear it. He saw the pain in his mother's eyes, felt the hurt he had caused her, and finally, he could no longer maintain his self-satisfaction. He walked out of the house through the dark hallway and stopped at the porch where Rosa stood. The entire space remained silent. But between them, there was no longer any distance. Caleb looked at his mother, his eyes filled with regret and awareness of the mistakes he had made. No words could erase it all, but he felt the deep need for forgiveness from the bottom of his heart. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, but those words seemed unable to express everything inside him. Those apologies couldn't repay what had been lost, couldn't heal the pain he had caused Rosa, but that was all he could do right now. Rosa turned around facing her son. Her eyes were no longer filled with anger or resentment, but with deep understanding. She looked at Caleb, and within her there was no longer any sense of injury, only peace. "You don't have to apologize to me," Rosa said, her voice warm, gentle, yet strong, like a firm affirmation from a mother who had endured so much. "Just learn how to stand up after every fall." Those words were not just forgiveness. They were a lesson, an encouragement for Caleb to learn how to live with his mistakes and not let those falls define his life. She didn't need their apologies. She didn't need their regrets. She only needed him to learn how to rise, to continue living a better life, valuing those around him. Caleb could no longer hold back. He moved closer to his mother, and in that moment, he felt the love she still had for him. He embraced Rosa, a tight hug, as if to say that he had recognized his mistakes and would never repeat them. The panic, the regret inside him were finally released. He didn't need to do anything more, just to acknowledge the truth and move forward. Rosa felt the change in Caleb, not through his words, but through his actions. She didn't need more words because she knew he understood. That hug was the end of a long, painful journey, but also the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of reconciliation. The moonlight continued to shine, and the night sky remained clear, as if proving that after every storm, there will always be light. Rosa looked up at the sky, and within her there was a sense of tranquility. She no longer felt any pain, only peace within her soul. "I will not forget, but I will not hold grudges either," Rosa thought quietly, not speaking the words aloud, but she knew her son had understood the value of forgiveness, and that was the most important lesson she could give Caleb. In that moment, Caleb not only realized his mistakes, but also understood that forgiveness was not the end of the story, but a new step to create real change. The story between him and his mother did not end with words of apology, but with real action, a step forward after mistakes, a determination to live truthfully with oneself. The night passed, on the light from the star shining continuously, and in the silence of the space, Rosa and Caleb, mother and son, found harmony within their souls. They didn't need to say anything more. They understood each other, and from here on, they would continue their journey ahead, no matter how heavy the past was, for there was a new hope, a new path opening up. After 2 years of deception, Rosa not only regained her respect, but also taught her son a lesson about justice. The truth will always find its way back, even if it's late. And sometimes forgiveness is the strongest weapon to erase the darkness.